He bought his grandmother's typewriter at an estate sale. It still had paper in the carriage. And when he typed his first question, it answered back, "Have you ever inherited silence you didn't know how to break?" The warehouse smelled like dust and decisions someone else had made. Callum moved through the rows of abandoned furniture with his hands in his pockets, shoulders curved inward like he was trying to take up less space in the world. He wasn't looking for anything. He'd woken up that morning, his 30th birthday, and realized the silence in his apartment had become a third roommate, so he'd left. Walked until he found this place, an estate sale in a converted industrial building where other people's lives were tagged and priced and waiting to be claimed by strangers. He paused near a table stacked with mismatched china, touched the rim of a teacup, cold porcelain under his fingertips. Someone had loved this once, used it every morning maybe. Now it sat here with a piece of masking tape that read $2. He kept walking. The lighting was dim. Overhead fluorescents that buzzed faintly and cast everything in a tired yellow glow. His footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Around him, other buyers murmured to each other, debating the value of lamps and mirrors and books no one had opened in decades. Callum felt like he was moving through a museum of small things people thought mattered until they didn't anymore. Then he saw it, pale green, sitting on a card table near the back wall, half hidden behind a stack of vinyl records. A typewriter. The enamel was faded but still luminous, like sea glass. The keys were worn smooth at the centers, evidence of 10,000 words, maybe more. The ribbon was still threaded through the mechanism, black and brittle with age. Callum stopped. There was a tag tied to the carriage return lever. Yellowed cardstock, ink smudged but legible. Elowen Ashford. Personal effects. His posture changed without him realizing it. Straightened, shoulders back, he moved closer. The world around him, the murmuring voices, the fluorescent hum, receded into the background static. He reached out, let his fingers hover over the keys, then pressed one. The letter E. It clicked down with a metallic snap that felt older than him, louder than it should have been. The sound carried a weight he couldn't name. There was paper still in the carriage, yellowed, brittle at the edges, and there was typing on it, a single line, incomplete. The hardest stories are the ones we tell ourselves when no one else is. The sentence stopped, mid-thought, like whoever had been typing it had simply stood up and walked away, planning to come back later, but later never came. Callum stared at the words until they blurred. Elowen Ashford. He barely remembered her, his grandmother, his mother's mother. A woman who existed mostly in the gaps of conversations his mother refused to have. He remembered her house once. Bookshelves, floor to ceiling, the smell of old paper and lavender. He'd been 8, maybe. Then his mother stopped visiting, stopped talking about her, and Callum had learned not to ask. "You interested in that one?" He turned. A woman in her 50s stood beside him, clipboard in hand. Margot, according to her name tag, estate sale coordinator. She had kind eyes and the practiced patience of someone who spent her days helping people decide what to keep from the wreckage of other lives. "Maybe," Callum said. His voice sounded strange. "What do you know about it?" Margot glanced at the typewriter. Elowen was a writer. Local. Never published, as far as I know. Kept to herself. She passed about 6 months ago. No immediate family came forward for most of her things, so. She gestured vaguely at the warehouse around them. "Here we are." Callum felt something tighten in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or shame. He should have known she'd died. Should have been there, but he hadn't even known where she lived anymore. "How much?" he asked. $25. He didn't hesitate, pulled his wallet out, handed her the bills. Margot wrote up a receipt, attached it to the typewriter with a rubber band, and smiled. She'd be happy it's going to someone who appreciates it. Callum wasn't sure he did. He wasn't sure what he felt at all. He lifted the typewriter. It was heavier than he expected. Solid. Real. The metal case was cold against his palms, and dust came off on his fingers, gray and fine, the residue of months sitting untouched. He carried it through the rows of discarded lives, past the teacups and the lamps and the books, out into the afternoon light. The air outside tasted like rain that hadn't fallen yet. He walked home slowly. The typewriter bumped against his hip with each step. People passed him on the sidewalk, laughing, talking, living their ordinary Saturday lives. And none of them knew he was carrying a ghost. By the time he reached his apartment, the sun was low and orange through the buildings. He set the typewriter on his kitchen table, stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. The pale green enamel caught the light. The keys gleamed dully, and the page, still in the carriage, waited. The hardest stories are the ones we tell ourselves when no one else is. Callum pulled out a chair, sat down, read the sentence again and again. He didn't know why it mattered, didn't know why his hands were shaking slightly as he touched the edge of the paper. But something in him recognized this moment, recognized the weight of it. He'd come to the estate sale to escape silence. Instead, he'd brought home an unfinished sentence that felt like it had been waiting 30 years for him to find it. The typewriter lived on his kitchen table for 3 days before he moved it. Callum told himself he'd find a proper place for it. A shelf, maybe, or the closet with the other things he didn't know what to do with. But every morning, he'd wake up and there it would be. Pale green in the early light. Patient. Waiting. He worked from home. Technical writing for a software company. Documentation no one read. Instructions for features no one used. He'd sit at his desk with his laptop open, staring at the blinking cursor on a white screen, and write sentences like, to configure the API endpoint, navigate to settings, and select advanced options. Soulless, precise, safe. His apartment smelled like stale coffee and the faint metallic scent that seemed to come from the typewriter itself. Old ink, old ribbon, old everything. The windows hadn't been washed in months. Morning light came through them, gray and tired, pooling on the floor in soft rectangles that never quite reached his desk. He used to write fiction, not documentation, not instructions, stories, real ones, with characters who wanted things and failed and tried again. He dreamed about being a novelist the way some people dream about being astronauts. Impossible and essential, and the only thing that made sense. His laptop still held the file. 17,000 words. A story about a man who found letters hidden in the walls of his house, written by someone who'd lived there 50 years before. He'd worked on it for 8 months. Then stopped. 2 years ago now. He told himself he'd go back to it. Told himself the block was temporary. But every time he opened the file, the words felt like someone else had written them. A stranger. Someone braver than he was. His phone buzzed on the desk, his mother's name on the screen. Iris. He let it go to voicemail. She called once a week. Left messages that were polite and distant and full of things she didn't say. He listened to them sometimes. Deleted them other times. They had a relationship built on space, careful, measured, like two people standing on opposite sides of a room who'd agreed never to move closer. He didn't know how to tell her he'd found Eloin's typewriter. Didn't know if she'd care. Didn't know if bringing it up would open doors he'd spent his whole life learning to keep closed. So he didn't call back. Instead, he ordered takeout. Scrolled his phone. let the evening dissolve into the gray loop his life had become. But the typewriter sat there. On the fourth night, he moved it to his desk. He told himself it was just about space. The kitchen table was cluttered. The desk made more sense. But the truth was harder to name. The typewriter's presence had started to feel less like a curiosity and more like a question he couldn't stop hearing. It sat beside his laptop now, old and new, side by side. The contrast felt like an accusation. He touched one of the keys. The letter T. It didn't press down. Just sat there, under his fingertip, cool and waiting. On the fifth night, he threaded new paper into it. His hands fumbled with the mechanism. He'd never used a typewriter before. Had to look up a video on his phone to figure out how the paper fed through the roller. When he finally got it in place, he sat back and stared at the blank page. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than usual. No hum of traffic from the street below. No distant voices through the walls. Just the creak of his desk chair when he shifted his weight. He typed one sentence, slowly, deliberately. Each key a small effort, a small click. I don't know how to start. He pulled the page out, held it up to the light. The words looked strange in typewriter font, mechanical and honest in a way digital text never was. He set the page on his desk, went to the kitchen for water, stood at the sink for a long moment, staring at nothing. When he came back, there was a second line on the page, beneath his sentence, in different typeface, older, fainter. You already have. Callum's hands went cold. He picked up the page, turned it over, examined the back. Nothing. Just the two lines, one beneath the other. His and someone else's. He looked at the typewriter. The ribbon was the same. The keys were still. The apartment was empty. His heartbeat was too loud in his chest. He told himself it was impossible. A trick of the light. Or maybe he'd typed both lines and forgotten. Exhaustion, lack of sleep, the gray fog of his days blurring together. But he knew his own typing, knew the pressure of his fingers on those keys. And the second line felt different, lighter, like it had been there for years, waiting for him to notice. He sat down, read both lines again. I don't know how to start. You already have. His hands were shaking. He didn't throw the page away. Didn't tell himself he was imagining it. Instead, he folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, beneath the abandoned manuscript file he'd printed out once and never looked at again. Then he sat in the silence and let the unease settle into his bones. The typewriter sat on his desk, patient, watching, waiting for him to type again. He typed the second question on a Tuesday night. The first page, the one with the impossible reply, sat in his desk drawer. But Callum couldn't stop thinking about it. He'd spent 2 days trying to rationalize it. Carbon paper he'd forgotten about. A mechanical quirk. Something logical. Something that made sense. But logic didn't explain the way the second line had appeared in typeface that looked decades old. So he threaded fresh paper into the typewriter, sat in the glow of his desk lamp, and typed. Who are you? The keys resisted under his fingers, each one requiring deliberate pressure, a small act of commitment. The sound was rhythmic, metallic, clack, clack, clack. It echoed in the silent apartment louder than it should have, like the typewriter wanted to be heard. He pulled the page out, stared at his question, then walked away. He made tea he didn't drink, stood at the window and watched the street below. Empty, dark, ordinary. His breathing felt too loud in his chest. He waited 10 minutes, then went back to his desk. There was a second line on the page. Someone who forgot to finish. Callum's hands went still. He picked up the paper. The reply was there in that same faded typeface. Lighter than his words, like it had been typed through a ribbon that was running out of ink decades ago. The texture of the letters felt different under his fingertips. Older. Real. He sat down slowly, This wasn't logic. This wasn't rational. But it was happening. On Wednesday night, he typed again. Why me? He didn't walk away this time. Just sat there, staring at the page, waiting. Nothing happened. The apartment stayed silent. The typewriter stayed still. Then he blinked, and the reply was there. Because you stopped too. His throat tightened. Thursday night, he asked, what do you want from me? The reply came faster this time, like the presence, whatever it was, had been waiting for the question. Nothing. Just to be heard. Callum started pinning the pages to his wall. 1, then 3, then 7. Each exchange, brief, cryptic, tender in a way that made his chest ache. The pages formed a constellation above his desk, evidence of a conversation that shouldn't exist but did. He stopped calling it strange, started calling it necessary. On Friday, the typewriter asked him a question. He'd just finished typing. Are you my grandmother? The reply didn't answer directly. What are you so afraid of? Callum stared at the words for a long time. His fingers hovered over the keys. He could feel his pulse in his throat. The question sat there on the page, patient and unavoidable, and he realized this was the moment. The point where he either walked away or let himself fall forward into whatever this was. He typed slowly, one word at a time. I'm afraid I'm ordinary. He pulled the page out, pinned it to the wall, walked to the kitchen, poured water he didn't drink, came back. The reply was waiting. Ordinary people, don't ask that question. He stared at the page, the words echoing somewhere deeper than sound. Maybe courage isn't loud. Maybe it's the quiet act of speaking anyway. If you've ever carried silence that heavy, stay, subscribe, because some stories only keep living when we share them. Something in him cracked. He sat down, threaded new paper into the carriage, and started typing everything. The novel he'd abandoned. 17,000 words about a man and hidden letters and a story Callum didn't know how to finish because he didn't know how to finish anything in his own life. The fear that he wasn't good enough, that he'd never be good enough. The shame of not visiting Elowen before she died, of not even knowing she'd died until he found her typewriter at an estate sale, surrounded by strangers. He typed about his mother, about the way Iris's sadness felt inherited, like grief was something passed down through generations the same way eye color or bone structure was. About how love in his family felt like something you were supposed to understand, but no one ever explained. He typed until his fingers ached, until the rhythmic clack of the keys became the only sound in the world, until the words stopped feeling like confession and started feeling like release. When he finally stopped, there were 4 pages. He pinned them all to the wall without reading them. His hands were shaking. His breathing was uneven. But he felt lighter than he had in years. He sat back down, stared at the typewriter, waited. The reply came on a fresh page he didn't remember loading. Tell me about the story you stopped writing. Callum read the line 3 times. The apartment was silent except for the sound of his own breath. The pages on the wall fluttered slightly in the draft from the window. The typewriter sat on his desk, pale green and patient. And for the first time in 2 years, Callum thought, maybe he could. Maybe he could tell her, tell someone, tell himself. He looked at the keys, at his reflection in the dark window, at the question waiting on the page. And he realized he wanted to answer. He told her about the novel on Saturday morning. Callum sat at his desk with fresh paper in the typewriter and typed the story he had been carrying for 2 years. The man, the house, the letters hidden in the walls, the way the protagonist spent the whole book searching for answers from someone who had been dead for decades. He typed, he finds all the letters, but he never finds peace. I did not know how to end it. So I stopped. He waited. The reply came slowly, like each word was being chosen carefully. Some stories do not end. They just find new people to tell them. Callum stared at the line, read it 3 times, then typed, "Did you finish yours?" The page stayed blank for a long time, long enough that he thought maybe the conversation was over, that he had asked the wrong question. Then, "No, but I want you to." His chest tightened. He picked up his phone, scrolled through his contacts, found Margot's number, the estate sale coordinator who had sold him the typewriter. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Margot, hi, this is Callum. I bought Elwyn Ashford's typewriter a couple of weeks ago." "Oh yes, I remember. Is everything all right? I was wondering, were there other things, other belongings she left behind?" A pause. Then, "There's a storage unit. Been unpaid for 4 months now. The facility has been trying to reach her family, but..." She trailed off. "Can I see it?" "Your family?" Callum hesitated. "I'm her grandson." Margot gave him the address. The storage facility smelled like dust and concrete and time. Callum stood in front of the Unit 73 with a key Margot had couriered over and a feeling in his stomach like standing at the edge of something he could not see the bottom of. The metal door was cool under his palm when he pushed it up. Inside, boxes, dozens of them, stacked against the walls, labeled in careful handwriting. Manuscripts, correspondence, journals. He stepped inside. The air smelled musty, old paper and something faintly floral. Lavender, maybe. Like sachets tucked between pages to keep the words from yellowing too fast. He opened the first box. Typed pages. Hundreds of them. Bound with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. The top page read, "The Distance Between Us, a novel by Elwyn Ashford." Beneath the title, a date, March 1989. He opened another box. More pages. Different title. When the Garden Remembers, 1992. And another. Letters to the Living, 1997. Rejection letters filled a separate box. Dozens of them. Publishers. Agents. Literary magazines. All variations of the same message. "Thank you for your submission. Unfortunately, this is not right for us at this time." The dates spanned 30 years. Callum's hands were shaking. At the bottom of the 3rd box, he found a journal. Black leather cover. Edges worn soft. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Elwyn's handwriting. Small, precise, relentless. He read, June 14th, 1995. "Iris called today. Said she will not bring Callum to visit anymore. Said I care more about imaginary people than real ones. Maybe she is right. Maybe I have been selfish. But I do not know how to be anything else. The words are the only place I know how to love without breaking things." Callum's throat closed. He flipped forward. October 3rd, 1997. "I finished the new novel today. It is about a grandmother who writes letters to a grandson she is not allowed to see. He never receives them, but she keeps writing anyway. I do not think I will submit this one. It is too true. And the truth does not sell." He kept reading, entry after entry, years compressing into paragraphs. Elwyn writing every day, pouring grief and regret and love into stories she never sent out into the world. The last entry was dated 6 months before she died. I wonder if he knows I thought about him every day. Probably not. How could he? I never told him. I told the characters instead. I told the pages. Maybe that is the same thing. Maybe it is not. Callum sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by boxes of words his grandmother had written, because she did not know how else to reach him. His hands were still shaking. His vision blurred. He pulled the manuscript from the first box, The Distance Between Us, opened it to the first page, read the dedication. "For the grandson I wrote to in every story. He stayed there for an hour. maybe longer, reading pages at random, finding himself in every protagonist, in every lost connection, in every unfinished conversation. Even when he finally left, he carried the manuscript with him. The weight of it felt inevitable, like something he had been meant to carry his whole life but had not known was waiting. That night, he sat at his desk, placed Eloin's manuscript beside the typewriter, threaded fresh paper into the carriage, typed, "I found your book." The "hey" reply came immediately. "Finish it." Callum stared at the two words. They were not a request. They were an inheritance, a responsibility, a permission he had not known he had been waiting for. He looked at the manuscript, at the typewriter, at the pages pinned to his wall. Evidence of a conversation that had pulled him back from silence. And he understood. She had not been haunting him. She had been waiting for him to be ready. He read Eloin's manuscript in one sitting, 300 pages. A story about a grandmother named Marion who writes letters to a grandson she's forbidden to see. The letters pile up in a drawer, unsent. Marion fills them with stories about gardens, about memory, about all the ways love survives when it has nowhere to go. The writing was raw, beautiful, achingly honest, and it stopped 2/3 of the way through. The last page ended mid-sentence. If I could tell him one thing, it would be... Callum sat on his floor, surrounded by pages, and felt something crack open in his chest. She'd left him the ending, not on purpose, not as a gift. But the absence was there, waiting, and he understood what finish it meant now. Not fix it, not improve it, just continue. Say the things she ran out of time to say. He started that night, threaded paper into the pale green typewriter, placed Eloin's manuscript beside him, and began typing the final third of her story, channeling her voice, imagining what Marion would have written in those unsent letters. The keys resisted under his fingers, each one a small act of will. The sound, clack, 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 filled his apartment like a heartbeat he'd forgotten he had. He wrote until dawn, until his fingers cramped, until the words stopped feeling like his and started feeling like theirs. By the end of the first week, his apartment had transformed. Pages everywhere, scattered across the floor, pinned to the walls, stacked on the kitchen counter beside coffee cups he'd forgotten to wash. The sterile silence he'd lived in for 2 years was gone, replaced by something chaotic, alive, urgent. He barely ate, barely slept. The world outside his windows felt muffled and distant, like he was living underwater, and the only thing that mattered was the next sentence. Mornings he worked on Eloin's story. Evenings he opened his own abandoned manuscript. 17,000 word, about a man and hidden letters. He read it differently now, not as failure, as foundation. The story wasn't finished, but it wasn't broken either, just waiting. He started writing again, slowly at first. Then with something that felt like hunger, the two stories began to blur. Eloin's grandmother reaching for a lost grandson, Callum's protagonist searching for a voice from the past. Both of them trying to bridge silence with words. One night, exhausted and half-dreaming, he typed on the typewriter, "I don't know if I'm good enough to finish this." He pulled the page out, stared at it. His vision blurred from lack of sleep. When he blinked, the reply was there. Good enough isn't the question. Brave enough is. He stared at those 5 words until they blurred. Brave enough. Not perfect, not proven, just willing to try. He thought about all the years he'd spent afraid his voice didn't matter, afraid he was ordinary, afraid that if he finished something and sent it into the world would confirm what he already suspected, that he wasn't enough. But Eloin had written for 30 years. collected rejection after rejection, and kept writing anyway, not because she thought she'd succeed, because the stories demanded to be told, because silence was worse than failure. Maybe that was the only courage that mattered. Callum sat back, let the words settle, then kept typing. He finished Elowyn's manuscript 3 weeks later. The final chapter was Marion writing one last letter, not to her grandson, to herself, forgiving herself for choosing art, for being imperfect, for loving in ways that didn't always look like love, but were love nonetheless. Callum typed the last line on the pale green typewriter and felt something release in his chest. If I could tell him one thing, it would be this. You are the story I couldn't stop telling, and that means something. He pulled the page out, added it to the stack, then sat in the silence of his apartment, no longer oppressive, no longer empty, just quiet, the good kind. His own manuscript was almost finished too. Another week, maybe. The ending had come to him in pieces. His protagonist finally writing back to the voice from the past, closing the loop, making peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honest felt like enough. He looked at his phone, at his mother's name in his contacts, the number he'd been avoiding for 8 months. The typewriter had given him something. Not just Elowyn's voice, but his own. The language to say things he'd never known how to say. To bridge silence he'd inherited and carried and passed down without meaning to. He picked up the phone, dialed. It rang twice before she answered. Callum? Her voice sounded surprised, careful, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she said the wrong thing. Hi, Mom, he said. I need to tell you something. They met at a cafe 2 days later. Callum arrived first. Sat at a table near the window where the afternoon light came through, pale and hesitant. His hands felt strange, without the typewriter keys under them. Empty, like he'd left part of himself at home. When Iris walked in, he barely recognized her. She looked older than he remembered. Her hair had gone more gray. There were lines around her eyes he didn't remember being there. She moved carefully, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible in the world. She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table. Hi, she said. Her voice was the same, soft, strained, familiar in a way that made his chest ache. Hi, Mom. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe hummed around them. A distant conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of ceramic. Normal sounds. But sitting across from his mother felt like sitting at the edge of something he couldn't see the bottom of. How are you? She asked. I'm okay, he said. Then, because small talk felt impossible, I found Grandma Elowyn's typewriter. Iris's face changed, something in her eyes. Not quite fear, not quite grief. Recognition, maybe. She looked down at her hands. And her manuscript, Callum continued. All of them, actually. 30 years of work. Boxes of it. Iris was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't know she kept writing. Every day, Callum said. Even after you stopped visiting. Even after the publishers stopped responding. She never stopped. Iris's jaw tightened. She looked out the window. She always chose the writing. Over everything. Over me. She chose both, Callum said quietly. She just didn't know how to make you believe it. Iris turned back to him. Her eyes were wet. You don't understand what it was like. Growing up with a mother who was always somewhere else. Physically there. But gone. Living in her head. In her stories. I needed her. And she was writing about people who didn't exist. Callum felt the weight of her words, the anger beneath them, the grief. I'm not saying she was perfect, he said, but she thought about you, about me. I read her journals. She wrote about us every day. Writing isn't the same as showing up. No, Callum agreed. It's not. but it's what she had. It's how she loved. Iris wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Her voice cracked when she spoke. When she got sick, I visited her. Once. We didn't fix anything. But she told me to tell you something. Callum's throat tightened. She said, "Tell him I'm sorry I didn't fight harder." Iris looked at him. "I never told you. I didn't know how. And then she died, and it felt too late." The silence between them felt enormous. 30 years of it, inherited and carried, and never spoken. Callum took a breath. "I stopped writing because I was afraid of becoming her. Alone, unheard, full of things no one wanted." Iris stared at him. "I pushed you away because I was afraid you'd leave me the way she did, that you'd choose something, anything, over staying." The truth sat between them, raw, painful, but finally visible. "I found her last novel," Callum said. "It's about a grandmother who writes letters to a grandson she's not allowed to see. The letters pile up, unsent. And the whole time, she's trying to tell him she's sorry. That love doesn't always look like presence. That sometimes it looks like absence that aches." Iris covered her mouth with her hand. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I finished it," Callum said. "The ending she didn't get to write. I gave Marion, the grandmother, a chance to say the things Elowen never got to say to you. To me." "What did she say?" Iris whispered. Callum's voice was steady. "That she was afraid too. That she didn't know how to be both, a writer and a mother. That she chose what she could hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. And that she was sorry, not for writing, but for not finding a way to make you feel seen while she did." Iris broke, not loudly, just quietly. Her shoulders shook. She pressed her palms against her eyes, and Callum reached across the table and took her hand. They sat like that for a long time, mother and son, holding on to each other across decades of silence, not fixing anything, just acknowledging it, letting the pain breathe. When Iris finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "Are you going to finish her book? Really finish it?" Callum nodded. "Yeah, I am." She wiped her face, looked at him with something that might have been pride, might have been relief. "Good," she said. "I'd like to read it." Callum felt something settle in his chest. Not resolution, not forgiveness. Exactly. Just recognition, the beginning of understanding. "You will," he said. Outside, the light was starting to fade. The cafe felt warmer now, less fragile. Iris ordered tea. Callum ordered coffee. And they sat together, talking in careful sentences, rebuilding something they'd never really had in the first place. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real was enough. Callum spent the next 6 weeks finishing both manuscripts. Elowen's first, then his own. His apartment had changed. The chaos of pages and coffee cups had resolved into something quieter, organized. The floor was clear now. The walls still held a few typed pages, reminders, not clutter. Soft lamplight pooled on his desk in the evenings, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. He typed the final line of Elowen's manuscript on a Tuesday evening. The pale green typewriter clicked softly under his fingers, each key a small goodbye. "You are the story I couldn't stop telling, and that means something." He pulled the page out, held it up to the light, read it once, twice, then set it carefully on top of the stack. 312 pages, complete. He waited, threaded fresh paper into the carriage, typed, "Is this what you wanted?" The page stayed blank. No reply, no faded typeface appearing like a whisper from the past. Just silence. He understood. She was done. Her work, his work, was finished. The typewriter sat on his desk, pale green and patient, but no longer waiting, just resting. Callum printed the manuscript the next morning, took it to a print shop that specialized in bookbinding. The woman behind the counter asked what it was for. "It's my grandmother's novel," he said. "She never got to see it finished." The woman smiled. She'd be proud. Callum didn't know if that was true, but he hoped so. He sent the bound manuscript to 3 small presses, independent publishers who still read unsolicited submissions. He didn't expect anything, didn't need anything. The act of sending it felt like enough, like placing a message in a bottle and letting the ocean decide where it went. Then he opened his own manuscript. 17,000 words he'd abandoned 2 years ago. He read it from the beginning, and this time the words didn't feel like they belonged to a stranger. They felt like his, imperfect, honest, worth finishing. He wrote the rest in another month, shorter than he'd planned, quieter, but better for it. The ending came easily. His protagonist, after finding all the hidden letters, after searching for answers from someone long dead, finally writes back. Not to the ghost, to himself, acknowledging that some questions don't have answers, that closure isn't always clean, that the act of searching was the point. Callum typed the last sentence on his laptop and felt something settle in his chest. Not triumph, just completion. The small, quiet satisfaction of having done something he'd been afraid to do. He sent his manuscript out too. 4 literary agents. No expectations, just release. One evening, weeks later, he sat at his desk with the typewriter beside him. He touched the keys gently, ran his fingers over the pale green enamel, threaded one last page into the carriage, typed, "Thank you." He waited. The page stayed blank, but that night he dreamed of Eloan, not in the warehouse, not surrounded by boxes of unsent work, just standing in a garden, sunlight filtering through leaves, her hands in the soil, smiling. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The dream felt like permission, like blessing, like goodbye. When he woke, the apartment was filled with morning light, the kind that came through clean windows and made everything feel possible. He made coffee, showered, looked at himself in the mirror and saw someone different. His posture was open, his shoulders back. He looked lighter, like he'd set something down he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was heavy. He slept through the night now, didn't wake at 3 a.m. with his heart racing and his thoughts spiraling. The gray loop he'd been living in for 2 years had broken, not disappeared, just opened into something wider. On a Saturday morning, he drove to the cemetery. He'd looked up Eloan's grave online, section 12, row 7, a simple headstone with her name and dates and nothing else. He brought the bound manuscript with him, held it carefully as he walked through the rows of markers, reading names of people he'd never met, lives reduced to stone and dates and sometimes a line of poetry. Eloan's grave was beneath an oak tree. The grass around it was green and well kept. Someone, maybe the cemetery staff, maybe no one, had left flowers once, but they'd long since wilted. Callum knelt, set the manuscript on the grass beside the headstone. "I finished your book," he said quietly. "I don't know if it's what you would have written, but it's what I could give you." The clear wind moved through the oak leaves above, a soft sound, like breathing. "I talked to Mom," he continued. "We're trying. It's not perfect, but we're trying." He touched the headstone, cool granite under his palm. "I wish I'd known you," he said. "Really known you. But I feel like I do now, a little, through the words." He stayed there for a long time, just sitting, letting the silence be what it was, not empty, not full, just present. When he finally stood, he left the manuscript there, a gift, an offering, proof that her story hadn't ended when she did. He walked back to his car, drove home, and when he got there, the typewriter was still on his desk. He didn't use it anymore. Didn't need to, but it was there, pale green and patient. A reminder of what silence could become when someone was brave enough to break it. 3 months later, the letter came. Callum found it in his mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, a plain white envelope with a return address he didn't recognize. He opened it standing in the hallway outside his apartment, and when he read the first line, his hands went still. Dear Mr. Ashford, we are pleased to inform you that we would like to publish your grandmother's novel, The Distance Between Us. He read it twice, 3 times, then called his mother. Iris cried on the phone, not sadly, just openly, like something in her had finally exhaled. She would have loved this, Iris said through tears. Yeah, Callum said quietly. She would have. They decided on the dedication together. Simple, true. For the grandson I wrote to in every story. Callum's own manuscript took longer. 4 rejections. Polite, professional. Each one a small sting that he learned to carry without letting it define him. On the 5th submission, an agent said yes. The novel would publish the following year. He didn't celebrate wildly. Just sat at his desk for a long moment, staring at the email, letting the reality settle. Then he made tea, looked out the window at the spring light filtering through green leaves, and smiled. Writing had become habitual now, not desperate, not a wound he was trying to close, just something he did. Every morning, he sat at his desk with coffee and his laptop and wrote. Some days the words came easily. Other days they didn't, but he showed up anyway. The typewriter sat beside him, pale green and quiet, a companion. A reminder. He didn't use it anymore, but it was there. On a Saturday in late April, Callum went back to the cemetery. He brought a printed copy of Alohan's book. The cover was simple, her name in elegant serif font, the title beneath it. It felt solid in his hands. Real. Proof that her voice had finally reached the world. He knelt beside her grave. The oak tree above was full now, leaves rustling softly in the breeze. The air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Fresh. Alive. He placed the book on the grass beside the headstone. They published it, he said quietly. Your book. It's out there now. The wind moved through the branches. Birds sang somewhere distant. The world continued around him, ordinary and beautiful. Mom and I are talking more, he continued. It's still hard sometimes, but we're trying. I think she's reading your book right now. She asked me for a copy last week. He touched the headstone. The granite was warm from the sun. My novel's getting published too. Next year. I'm scared, but I think that's okay. You were probably scared too, every time you sent something out, and you kept going anyway. He sat there for a while, just breathing, letting the silence be enough. I'm working on something new, he said eventually. A story about a woman who leaves letters in library books for strangers to find. It's not about you, but you're in it, in the way she hopes someone will read her words and understand, in the way she keeps trying even when no one responds. He stood slowly, looked at the book resting on the grass. Thank you, he said, for not giving up, for leaving me something to finish. The oak leaves rustled, a soft sound, like agreement. Callum walked back to his car, drove home through streets that felt familiar and new at the same time. When he got to his apartment, the light was golden through the windows, warm, inviting. He made coffee, sat at his desk, opened his laptop. The typewriter sat beside him, pale green, patient, gleaming softly in the afternoon light. He glanced at it, smiled. then turned back to his screen. The cursor blinked, waiting. He typed, not on the typewriter, on the laptop, because the tools didn't matter. What mattered was the act. The choosing to speak when silence was easier. The choosing to continue when stopping felt safer. He was writing about the woman, and her letters now, chapter 3. The part where she starts to wonder if anyone will ever find what she's left behind, if her words will matter to someone she'll never meet. Callum knew the answer, but his character didn't. Not yet. He wrote until the light faded, until the coffee went cold, until the words found their rhythm and carried him forward. The typewriter watched, silent, complete. Some stories don't end, he thought. They just find new people to tell them. Outside, the city hummed with evening. Inside, Callum kept writing, sentence by sentence, word by word, building something new from the inheritance of silence, finally broken. The pale green typewriter gleamed softly beside him. A bridge, a gift, a reminder that love and legacy are the same thing, and that we are never truly alone when we create, because every story is a thread connecting us to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. The cursor blinked. Callum smiled and kept writing.